The opening words are a poem that's entitled "The Question" by Rosemary Watola Tromer. The question. All day I replay these 6 words. Is this the path of love? I think of them as I rise, as I wake my children, as I wash dishes, as I drive too close behind the slow blue Subaru. Is this the path of love? I think of these words as I stand in line at the grocery store. I think of them as I sit on the couch beside my daughter. Amazing how quickly 6 words become a compass, a new lens through which to see myself moving in the world. I notice what the question is not. It's not, is this right? It's not, is this wrong? It just longs to know how the action of existence links us to this path of love. And is it this? Is it this? All day I let myself be led by that question. And all day I let myself not be too certain of the answer. Is it this? Is this the path of love? That's what I ask myself as I wait for the next word to come. The reading I have selected is by Lutheran pastor Nadia Bolz-Weber. It's a modern adaptation of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the agnostics. Blessed are those who doubt, those who aren't sure, those who can still be surprised. Blessed are those who have nothing to offer. Blessed are those for whom death is not an abstraction. Blessed are those who have buried their loved ones, for whom tears could fill an ocean. Blessed are those who have loved enough to know what loss feels like. Blessed are those who don't have the luxury of taking things for granted anymore. Blessed are those who can't fall apart because they have to keep it together for everyone else. Blessed are those who still aren't over it yet. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who no one notices, the kids who sit alone at middle school lunch tables, the laundry guy at the hospital, the sex workers, and the night shift street sweepers. Blessed are the forgotten. Blessed are the closeted. Blessed are the unemployed, the unimpressive, the underrepresented. Blessed are the wrongly accused, the ones who never catch a break, the ones for whom life is hard. For Jesus chose to surround himself with people like that. Blessed are those without documentation. Blessed are the ones without lobbyists. Blessed are those who make terrible business decisions for the sake of people. Blessed are the burned out social workers, and the overworked teachers and the pro bono case takers. Blessed are the kind-hearted NFL players and the fundraising trophy wives. And blessed are the kids who step between the bullies and the weak. Blessed is everyone who has ever forgiven me, especially when I didn't deserve it. And blessed are the merciful, for they totally get it. You are of heaven, and Jesus blesses you. If Jesus was among us at the start of this millennium, I wonder how he might go about spreading his message. I'm quite sure he'd have a website and write a blog page. He'd no doubt have a Twitter account. After all, the Dalai Lama has 4 million followers on Twitter. Oprah has 11 million, and Lady Gaga 25 million. A lot of competition out there. He might be surprised if he showed up to learn that someone named Jesus Christ already has a Facebook account in that name. One way or another, I trust he would adapt to our contemporary mode of communication, and that his vocabulary would have evolved past the English of the King James Version. I'd like to imagine that he'd approve of my appropriation of the form and formula of his teachings known as the Beatitudes from the Sermon on the Mount, from the book of Matthew. But be they factual or metaphorical, the stories and teachings that are contained in the New Testament indicate that Jesus was something of a troublemaker himself. He was hardly a spokesperson for the status quo, and as such, I feel confident that he would bless those of us who challenge injustice and question oppressive authorities and otherwise go about our business afflicting the comfortable. Blessing the troublemakers wouldn't be much of a stretch for the man behind the Beatitudes. I should note here that while I don't want to limit the definition of troublemaker too much, I want to make it clear I'm not talking about becoming terrorists or anarchists or simply being habitually contrarian. There are not generally these folks who are troublemakers don't usually turn out to be lobbyists or columnists or academics. They are otherwise ordinary folks who sit in the back of the room and raise their hand when everyone thinks they've made up their mind in order to ask the one hard question that's on everyone's mind just the same. Those who refuse to be discouraged by the odds that seem to face them, who are undeterred by the systems that are somehow rigged to ignore who they are. Most troublemakers that I know are sort of naive and idealistic and irrationally hopeful and terribly sweet. And for those things alone, Jesus would no doubt bless them and love them. And now here comes the understatement of the decade. Trouble is a brew. And not the good kind. How else could an Episcopal bishop's call for mercy in a society's relationship to the poor and the displaced and the fearful be twisted into a crude and baseless insult to the president? If that is an insult, well then, Christianity is finished. And while it's true that the current occupant of the White House was, I must confess, duly elected. I'd wager that the vast majority of the flood of executive orders that he signed on his first day in office have very little to do with the reasons that many, if not most of his supporters supported him. Many of those orders, if not most, as those of you who no doubt followed it, are hard to see as anything other than hateful, vindictive actions geared to minimize fairness and freedom. What would be the harm of Black Lives Matter or pride flags occasionally being flown outside of government facilities? But he has barred that from happening in the future. And what local municipalities will be inspired by his actions to enforce those same petty limitations on their own little corner of the world, just because it is Trump's whimsical expression of his stupidity? And why, I ask, take away the personal protections from retired government officials who are under the threat of death, and taking it away based upon his assessment that they can afford their own protection now that they're out of government service? Well, I have a question. Will he forfeit his own government security because he can afford his own when he is finished? Dream on. These small examples of tyranny only scratch the surface of the turmoil that intentionally has been set loose on us as a society. It's time for what the late congressman and civil rights leader, whose name I didn't write down, John Lewis, right. I even looked it up and then didn't write it down, because I wanted to get it right. He advised young people, get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Now I'll never forget his name. In many ways, our very existence as a religious movement can be attributed to the work and wisdom of centuries of troublemakers. Back in the start, they called them heretics. And to just sort of settle them down, they would burn them at the stake. But of course, that doesn't work, because ideas, true ideas, are fireproof. That same spirit of questioning, testing, doubting, examining are all very human traits, and they remain a part of the liberal church tradition even now. Liberal in the sense of meaning freedom, not standing on some political spectrum. As William Ellery Channing preached in the 19th century in Boston, when he said that revelation is not sealed. And by this he meant that God's truth was not a one-time only offer that was put between the cover of a Bible, and that was all the truth that would ever be revealed in the universe. We hear that, and we probably concur that we find the ways of revelation being shown us in every day of our living life. But we have to think back to how shocking that was, that statement of belief in the 1840s in this country. It was an incredibly radical thought. And I don't know how many of you know this, but we have one of William Ellery Channing's Bibles on the stairway going downstairs. To declare that God's truth showed up in other places than the Scriptures was an incredibly troublesome departure back in the 19th century. And I imagine it might be in various churches in this town this morning. I'm a little nervous about my challenge to preach to a town-wide service in the end of March. I'll try and behave for you all. Or maybe you'd rather I didn't. I don't know. One of the best stories to be told about this topic is about one of our all-star squad of troublemakers that exists in our history. This troublemaking team was a co-ed team composed of folks like Olympia Brown and James Reeb and Margaret Fuller and Theodore Parker and Clarence Skinner and Pete Seeger and John Preston. The team would be incomplete without, of course, Mr. Thoreau, perhaps the closest thing we have in our tradition to a full-time professional troublemaker. So, of course, the story must be about him. Thoreau had lectured about most of the social issues that plagued his time in Massachusetts, and most of his ideas were quite a ways out of the mainstream. He was opposed to the Mexican-American War, and he saw this as a challenge of both American imperialism and the anticipated spread of slavery into this new territory, and so therefore he was deeply and profoundly opposed to it. So he decided the best way for him to make a personal stand in this regard was to not pay his taxes. I kind of like that idea. He didn't want to contribute his money to that immoral war. Well, of course, they tracked him down eventually and arrested him for his crime. And in July of 1846, he was thrown into jail in Concord, Massachusetts. He was thrilled. From what I can tell, that was his whole point. The jailer, Sam Staples, was a friend of Thoreau's, Concord being a little small town, and he offered that he just would go ahead and pay the tax for Thoreau, spring him from the joint and get him home in time for dinner. Thoreau refused his friend's offer, and as the word spread through town, folks came to the jail and chatted with Thoreau through the barred windows between he and the street. His Aunt Maria came and did pay the tax for him, but by then the jailer had gone home for the day, and it would be the next day that Thoreau would be anticlimactically discharged from his cell into the mean streets of Concord. But not before he had an evening visit from Ralph Waldo Emerson, his close friend and mentor. There is a brief exchange that remains from that time, and of course, all of these things could be just something wonderfully made up, or they could be something wonderfully true. Emerson, outside on the street, looked at Thoreau and said, "What are you doing in there?" And Thoreau responded with a question of his own, "What are you doing out there?" Thoreau would go on to write what is probably his most widely read essay, Civil Disobedience. And through that short piece, he inspired generations of other troublemakers all around the world. Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr. among them, all gave tribute to Thoreau's writing to inspire and support their own civil disobedience. Lest I give a false impression that in some ways UUs have a corner on this market of spiritual troublemaking, we have to just remind ourselves of the kind of disorientation that the Vatican often stirs up for themselves, and most profoundly in their frequent scorching reprimand of sisters, of nuns. Yes, those wild women in their habits. If it wasn't true, it would border on being hilarious. Well, I've known a nun or two. And apart from the characterization of ruler-wielding nuns maintaining order in parochial schools, which I was spared, or Sally Fields flying through the air in The Flying Nun, most nuns that I've gotten to know are really pretty cool people. Smart, spiritual, savvy. They also have done a huge but nearly invisible share of work of that particular church. I have no doubt, given the choice of the company of the College of Cardinals or a bunch of Benedictine nuns running a homeless shelter, Jesus would be there with the sisters. He wouldn't have the slightest idea who the cardinals were. Prior to the current pope who sits in Rome, the Vatican, the nuns, they seem to wish the nuns would worry a little bit less about the poor and join them in their more convincingly in their campaigns against things like abortion and gay marriage. But the pesky nuns are in the habit of being devoted to the poor, the oppressed, and those who suffer, kind of like you know who. This fact is either lost upon the bishops and cardinals, or it's the source of their antipathy. What matters is that these nuns are causing trouble in a way that really makes a difference. And a corrective solution cannot really be forced upon them. As one commentator summarized a few years back when Pope Benedict was sitting in Rome, his counselor said to him, "All I can say to you is this: you're crazy to mess with the nuns." The writer Anne Lamott published an essay last week in the Washington Post that I would urge you all to go home and Google. A few of you have seen it? A few heads nodding. Well, she's a hard person to describe. In one thing, she starts out her essay, which I don't have it right in front of me, she starts out her essay by saying that this is a time of resistance, and she's not sure what her role will be because her knees hurt and her hip is kind of sore. That's how she begins. Not sure what she's up to, but she's in it. In any case, go find it. I mean, it's protected by a firewall by the Washington Post. But if you Google it, you'll find a spot where it's titled, Anne's title is like, "The whole essay is here, you don't have to go to the Washington Post and pay them money." Anyway, the essay is a call for resistance. She reminds us that resistance may not make the news very often, but resistance is almost everywhere we look. And I'm just going to read a brief excerpt because so often to me, her words are kind of like life support to me. And I can't help but commend it to you. This is what she wrote. In describing resistance. Resistance is in the witness and courage of the Right Reverend Miriam Boudet, the Bishop of Washington. It's in the bags of groceries we keep taking to food pantries. It looks like generosity. It looks like compassion. It looks like profound caring for the victims of the fires in California and providing refuge for immigrants and resisting the idea that they are dangerous and unwanted, and reaching out to queer nieces and siblings and strangers and helping resist the notion that their identities are unworthy, let alone illegal. It is in our volunteer support for public schools and libraries because we know the new president holds them in contempt and fear. She does not mince words. And she provides encouragement and reminders of the kind of resistance that we ourselves can put in place. Not all of us, I know, are cut out to be troublemakers in the most formal sense. I don't wish for anyone to get the idea that I believe that this is the normative state of religious people. Perhaps it's even a less common thing among religious folks in the general sense, since in many ways, churches, religious communities thrive on stability, on shared traditions, on common values, and on unity, making the troublemakers in our midst sometimes a little bit hard for us to even take. But what's important to me is to feel I've addressed that essential role of the troublemaker in sustaining healthy communities, because they are as essential as anything. A whole congregation of troublemakers would quickly be challenged to be a close-knit community, perhaps. That maybe isn't their greatest strength, and maybe not even their concern. And because of that, we can have very mixed feelings about these characters in our midst. Most of us prefer, at least some of the time, to live in an island of relative tranquility in the midst of life's many storms. A dose of disruption can set off waves of anxiety, which can sometimes lead people to want to eliminate the source of that disruption, rather than to take a look to examine the nature of the anxiety which has been brought into blossom somehow in their lives. So when I think about church and myself and my own role here, yes, I have a responsibility to speak in a prophetic way, but I also have a responsibility to balance that in providing a pastoral nest, shall we say, in which the difficulties and challenges that we face in our lives beyond this place can be looked at and comforted and assisted. It can be a complicated role. But I'm not here to preach every single Sunday against what I see as these sources of evil, but they are not to be neglected either. The problem with troublemakers is that you may expel the one you have, but there's usually more where they came from. It's also important to realize that a troublemaker can't be dissuaded from the strongest convictions that they carry in their daily life. There is sacrifice involved in being a troublemaker, wherever it may be. It may cost us our respectability among certain people. It may even challenge some friendships. I've spoken here and written some about the challenges of my own relationship with my very best friend of almost 60 years, who voted in a way that wasn't the way I voted. We'll leave it at that. The trade-off is in those kind of conflicts that you have to do the best you can to hold your integrity and to nurture a self-respect that allows you to speak your truth to others. And those are the kind of blessings of the highest order that I think we can bestow upon each other. And with enough practice and experience as troublemakers, you will gain in wily wisdom, I know. Like the mother superior of a convent who was asked by a community organizer if she would supply 2 nuns to come in and work several days a week on a literacy project that this community organizer had undertaken. And the mother superior said she would have to check this out with her bishop to get permission for this to happen. And a few days later, the project organizer came by the office to inquire what the bishop had determined. And the Mother Superior said, well, I've spoken with the bishop, and he was adamant. He refuses to allow us to send 2 nuns to the literacy project to assist you in the weeks to come. And I cannot disobey his authority. And then as he turned to leave, she said, so I'll be sending you 3.